Every few sets, new card mechanics are introduced into the Pokemon TCG to add some new variety to the game. Usually, cards using new rules are the most desirable and powerful cards out of the set that they appear in. What they rarely do is tie the brand new mechanic to exclusively promo cards. The Pokemon V-Union were a series of promo cards released in 2021. 5 complete V-Unions were released across different box sets. Due to how the V-Union cards worked, these promo cards saw niche to no play in the standard format. Today, we're going to be looking at each of the Pokemon V-Union, explain why they didn't meet the power level needed to see play, and how players tried to build around them. Before getting into each of the cards, we first have to look at how the mechanic actually functions in-game. Each Pokemon V-Union is actually made up of 4 different cards. Like the Pokemon Legends that came before it, you needed every component of a Pokemon V-Union in order to put them into play. Unlike Legends, you needed all 4 pieces of the V-Union to be in your discard pile, at which point you could put them onto your bench as a singular card. The idea behind what makes these cards unique is that being made up of multiple cards allowed the game designers to give each V-Union upwards of 4 different attacks or abilities. You could only play a Pokemon V-Union from your discard pile this way once per game. Additionally, any Pokemon V-Union that's KO'd grant the opponent 3 prize cards. Having to play Pokemon from your discard pile seems strange on the surface, but it greatly benefits the V-Union player. Generally, getting 4 different cards in your discard pile is much easier than getting 4 specific cards into your hand. Sadly, that doesn't mean it's easy to do in the standard format, with the V-Union cards being functionally impossible to search out of the deck using traditional means. This is due to the other mechanic of Pokemon V-Union. Each piece did not count as either a basic or evolution Pokemon, meaning they were much harder to search out of your deck than every other Pokemon card. At the time of the release, many decks were utilizing cards such as Quick Ball or Evolution Incense to search the Pokemon cards needed for their strategy. On release, if you wanted to search out your Pokemon V-Union pieces, you needed to run cards like Great Ball or Adventurous Discovery. From there, in order to get the pieces into the discard pile, you needed to play the cards and allow you to discard cards from your hand. To help rectify the issue of searching and then discarding the pieces, the promo card Professor Burnett was printed, which lets you put any 2 cards from your deck into your discard pile. Since it could only put half of your V-Union into the discard, something not worth using your 1 supporter card for your turn, this card never saw play alongside its intended partners. For a majority of decks, it's simply not worth the process of setting up a V-Union when you can play easier to enable cards. Players using Pokemon V-Unions also had to contend with the issue of what to do when 1 or more of your pieces are in your prize cards. If you had a V-Union card stuck there, you'd have to take KOs on your opponent's Pokemon to try and find your missing pieces. Even if you managed to find it out of your prize cards, if your strategy revolved around the Pokemon you couldn't get into play, it would often be too late. Initially, in the standard format, these cards were not worth playing in any competitive deck list. It wasn't until much later in the format's lifespan that V-Unions could see a little bit of a consistency boost with the reprinting of Ultra Ball. Since Ultra Ball can search out any Pokemon while discarding 2 cards, it was a perfect fit in a deck looking to use V-Unions. Not being a basic or evolution card didn't matter when Ultra Ball searched for anything. And having a good way to discard pieces of the V-Union you drew as an item card helped you set up the Pokemon and boosted your ability to find the items you needed out of your deck. With a better way to search and discarding V-Union cards, one of them actually began to fill a niche role in the standard format. Mewtwo V-Union is the only V-Union to have seen top level tournament success in the standard format. When put into play, this Pokemon has 310 HP, 4 attacks, and 1 ability. Its ability, Photon Barrier, prevented all additional effects of attacks done to it. Although this effect doesn't matter in every matchup, being able to prevent attacks like Giratina V-Star's Lost Requiem from taking instant KO against your 3 prize Pokemon was pretty valuable. For a single colorless energy, Union Gain lets you attach 2 psychic energies from your discard pile to itself. This is an attack that every V-Union Pokemon has, although they attach different types of basic energy based on the Pokemon's type. If you manage to set up the V-Union early in the game, Union Gain would let you quickly attach all the energy you needed to start using your other extremely strong attack. For 2 Psychic and 1 colorless energy, you could use either Super Regeneration or Cyplosion. Super Regeneration heals 200 damage from Mewtwo V-Union, whereas Cyplosion lets you put 16 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you'd like. Lastly, for 3 Psychic and 1 colorless energy, Final Burn dealt a flat 300 damage. Every one of these attacks contributed to the Pokemon's viability in the standard format. The first time the Pokemon saw success at a large tournament, it was the main face of a control deck. In the early game, these decks would use cards such as Snorlax and its Gourmandise ability to draw into disruptive pieces like Crushing Hammer and Yveltal. Disruptive effects bought the control player enough time to set up their Mewtwo V-Union. Control strategies were the perfect fit for this card, since they could not only buy you time to set up, but also regularly played the only card capable of getting V-Union counterparts out of your prize cards. Peonia is a supporter with the effect of putting 3 of your prize cards into your hand and then putting 3 cards from your hand back into your prize cards. Control strategies already love using this card, since they regularly wanted to get one key card out of their prize cards anyway. Once a control player gets Mewtwo V-Union going, it would sit in the active spot and super regeneration every turn. At the time of the deck's popularity, very few meta strategies were capable of dealing with the Pokemon that healed for 200 damage every turn, on top of contending with the other disruptive effects the opponent would use. Even if they could deal over 200 damage in one attack, the Mewtwo V-Union these control decks used also had damage reduction effects like Radiant Gardevoir and V-Guard Energy, to reduce the damage as much as possible before healing on the next turn. When fully set up, Mewtwo V-Union was impossible for players to wear down, at which point the control player would wait for their opponent to have no cards left in their deck and win the game. With the release of Scarlet and Violet base set, Mewtwo V-Union got to see play due to its offensive capabilities. Gardevoir EX decks were a perfect fit for Mewtwo V-Union due to having great synergy together. Not only does Gardevoir EX's Psychic Embrace let you quickly set up as much energy as needed to a Mewtwo, but the Kirlia commonly used to evolve into Gardevoir has the Refinement ability, which lets you find and discard V-Union pieces. Refinement has the effect to discard one card, draw 2 more cards. With the effect to draw power provided by Refinement, search options like Ultra Ball, the Gardevoir decks using Mewtwo V-Union could assemble all the pieces and attack with the Pokemon regularly. These kinds of decks loved having access to Cyplosion in order to KO multiple low HP Pokemon in a single turn. Final Burst also gives Gardevoir decks an easy way to one-hit KO mini Pokemon V-Star, since they usually maxed out at 280 HP. While it's not the most popular version of Gardevoir EX decks, it is a legitimate variant that players have been known to play around with. Even though Mewtwo V-Union is the only one to have seen competitive play in the standard format, each Pokemon V-Union was far easier to play in the expanded format. In the expanded format, Battle Compressor is a mainstay item card that many decks regularly use or build around. The item card lets you put any 3 cards from your deck into the discard pile. Battle Compressor is easily the best way to set up a Pokemon V-Union, since it puts 3 of your 4 pieces in the discard pile without using your once per turn supporter. The expanded format also had Gladion, a supporter with the effect to replace itself with any one of your prize cards. Thanks to the expanded format's improved card pool with cards such as Dedenne GX and Crobat V providing lots of card draw without using your supporter card, V-Union decks can use Gladion without slowing down their initial setup turns. The wider card pool also means there are many different cards which help put energy into play as soon as you put down the V-Union without having to use Union Gain. The most relevant of the Pokemon V-Union in the expanded format is Pikachu V-Union. This Pokemon has 4 attacks. For 1 colorless, it can use Union Gain to attach 2 electric energies from your discard pile to it. For 1 electric and 1 colorless, Shocking Shock deals 120 damage and paralyzes the defending Pokemon on a coin flip. For those of you who don't know, a paralyzed Pokemon can't attack or retreat during its controller's next turn. If your opponent doesn't have a card that lets them switch out their active Pokemon, paralysis can prevent your opponent from attacking and lets you deal more damage without taking any in return. For 2 electric and 1 colorless, you can either use Disconnect or Electro Ball together. Disconnect deals 150 damage and prevents your opponent from using item cards during the next turn. Electro Ball together deals 250 damage with no additional effect. It's because of Disconnect that Pikachu V-Union saw extensive use and experimentation in online expanded format tournaments. Since expanded decks often play less supporter cards than standard decks due to having far stronger items, being able to lock your opponent out of playing them as early as your first turn could be devastating. With many other options for item lock, Pikachu V-Union stood out among them due to Disconnect KOing a significant portion of the metagame without any damage modifiers in 2 attacks. For comparison, the other premier item lock Pokemon expanded at the time was Vigavolt V, which dealt only 50 damage. Decks built around Electric-type Pokemon also benefited from the presence of many synergistic cards that didn't exist in the standard format. Tapu Koku's Prism Star's Dance of the Ancients ability lets you put itself into the Lost Zone to attach 1 electric energy from your discard pile to 2 of your bench Pokemon. Thunder Mountain Prism Star reduces the attack cost of all your electric Pokemon's attack by 1 electric energy. These 2 cards and the many ways you can search for them easily enable you to set up a Disconnect on the first turn and lock your opponent out of items for the rest of the game. You'd pretty much only want to use Disconnect, but Electro Ball together's 250 damage for very little energy does enable this deck to 2-hit KO mini Pokemon, or even 1-hit KO high HP cards like Shadow Rider Clarix VMAX if you played multiple Electro powers that turn. Ironically, one of Pikachu V-Union's major weaknesses is the strategy's vulnerability to being item locked. Since you rely on Battle Compressor in order to get the main attacker on the bench in the first place, being locked out of items means you can never properly set up. Most decks can simply take the time to set up under an item lock while not being dealt much damage. V-Union decks and Expanded can't really do this due to the card's unique mechanics. You can't put them into play unless they're in your discard pile, and you can't get them into your discard pile without item cards. Despite being true for every expanded V-Union deck, it arguably affects Pikachu V-Union decks more since they don't play easily accessible backup attackers. The heavy item-like weakness is the main reason behind the deck's inability to remain relevant in the expanded format, since many players prefer to simply use other electric-type decks. As of right now, the premier electric-type deck Miraidon EX does occasionally use item locks to deal with certain matchups, but prefers Vigavolt V to taking up less deck space and being easier to set up. The next V-Union to see some experiment in the expanded format was Zacian V-Union. This V-Union had 320 HP and 4 attacks. For one colorless, you could use Union Gain to attach up to 2 metal energies to itself from the discard pile. For 2 metal and 1 colorless, you had the choice to use either Dance of the Crowned Sword or Steel Blade. The former dealt 150 damage and reduced the damage dealt by the defending Pokemon by 150 during your opponent's next turn, with the latter dealing 200 damage. For 3 metal and 1 colorless energy, Master Blade dealt 340 damage and forced you to discard 3 energies attached to Zacian V-Union. While Dance of the Crowned Sword provided solid utility in situations where your opponent couldn't switch their active Pokemon, Master Blade was the main reason to consider using this card. For reference, as of writing this video, there isn't a single Pokemon printed in the history of the game with more than 340 HP. While you could choose to use Zacian V-Union as your only attacker and build your deck wholly around it, the card slots very well into existing Zacian V decks. By including a few copies of Battle Compressor, these decks gain access to a single Pokemon that could hit incredibly large HP thresholds that Zacian V couldn't. Zacian decks were already very well suited to enabling multiple Master Blade attacks in a row since they played multiple cards to recur energies from the discard pile. Bronzong and its Metal Links ability lets you attach a metal energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon once per turn, and Metal Saucer providing the same effect as an item card. When combined with Battle Style's Bronzong's Metal Transfer ability, which allows you to move metal energy around your Pokemon as much as you'd like during your turn, you could constantly fire off attacks no Pokemon was capable of surviving. Zacian V's Intrepid Sword ability also helped power up Zacian V-Union. If you managed to attach any metal energies to Zacian V with Intrepid Sword, you could use Metal Transfer to move that energy onto a V-Union and then use Master Blade. Despite the upsides of being able to deal massive damage for multiple consecutive turns, Zacian V-Union decks didn't particularly catch on in the format. As better Pokemon cards were printed into the expanded format, Zacian decks slowly fell off the face of the metagame. Although they still see niche play, even with this little play, Zacian decks didn't want to use Zacian V-Union due to the release of Zacian V-Star. For 2 metal and 2 colorless energy, this card's V-Star power, Sword Star, dealt 310 damage plus 30 damage to itself. With a Rusted Sword attack, Sword Star deals 340 damage. Zacian decks generally prefer using the V-Star since it's significantly easier to enable in order to deal 340 damage, even though it's a once per game attack. The final V-Union to have seen competitive experimentation is Greninja V-Union. This Pokemon has 4 different attacks and 3 different abilities. For 1 colorless energy, it can use Union Gain to attach 2 water energies from your discard pile to itself. For 1 water energy, it can use Aqua Edge to deal 130 damage with no additional effect. For 2 water and 1 colorless energy, you can choose between Twister Shuriken or Waterfall Bind. Twister Shuriken deals 100 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Waterfall Bind deals 180 damage and prevents a defending Pokemon from retreating during your opponent's next turn. Its first ability, Ninja Body, prevents all effects of items done to it. The Antidote Jutsu prevents Greninja V-Union from being poisoned. Its last ability, Feel the Way, lets you look at your opponent's hand once per turn. The abilities aren't particularly relevant, and neither are most of the attacks. What makes this card interesting is the Twister Shuriken attack. A single attack dealing 100 damage to all of your opponent's bench Pokemon is unheard of on any other card, and brought a lot of eyes to this card's competitive potential. Greninja V-Union's potential in the expanded format was hyped up by the fact that it fit perfectly with an already established archetype in Archie's Blastoise. These decks would try to use Archie's Ace in the Hole to put a Deluge Blastoise into play as soon as possible. Once Blastoise is in play, Deluge lets you attach as many water energies from your hand to Pokemon as often as you'd like. On the surface, Greninja V-Union is the perfect attacker to utilize these kinds of decks. Archie's Blastoise decks already use Battle Compressor to put Stage 2 water Pokemon into their discard pile. So switching out your other attackers for V-Union pieces seemed like an obvious move. Unfortunately, decks using Archie's Ace in the Hole had left the metagame by the time Greninja V-Union released, and it wasn't enough to boost the deck back into top tier contention. Notably, this card has seen some experimentation in the standard format recently due to the printing of Baxcalibur, which has the same effect as Deluge Blastoise, although it hasn't seen competitive success. The last V-Union, Morpeko, is significantly weaker than the other 4 V-Union Pokemon. For 1 colorless energy, Union Gain attaches 2 electric energies from your discard pile to itself. For 2 colorless, All You Can Eat draws cards until you have 10 in hand. For 1 electric and 2 colorless, Burst Wheel discards all energies attached to itself to deal 100 damage for each discarded this way. For the same cost, you can also use Electric Ball to deal 160 damage. While this card has a potentially enormous damage output with Burst Wheel, there are many other Pokemon with similar attacks that are easier to set up, so the card never saw experimentation in either Standard or Expanded. The V-Union is one of the strangest to be printed in the Pokemon TCG, with the cards having multiple unique rules and mechanics. While most of them have struggled in the Standard format, in the Expanded format where better enablers exist, their merits have led to see niche play and some experimentation. While they never had the staying power to remain relevant to the metagame, they certainly had a unique spot in the format's history as a mechanic that was far more playable and Expanded.